Good morning, everyone. It'll just be a few moments. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the end of July. My name is Larry Klein. I'm mayor for the city of Sunnyvale, and this is the 20th installment of my weekly virtual office hours. People continue to say they appreciate these weekly updates, and I'll continue to do them through the shelter in place and even longer. And it looks like that will be going on for quite a while now. So, these Facebook Live events give me a chance to give people updates, answer some questions, and just provide some general words of encouragement. It's good for me to actually, reach out to people, give people updates, and hopefully it helps people in our community feel more engaged and kind of builds community at the end of the day. So thank you for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale during these extraordinary times. I hope everyone's doing well, staying healthy. Please remember to take care of yourself both physically and mentally. It's sunny out, but I do see that people are becoming very frustrated with how long this has taken. Follow the county health orders. Remember that you and the efforts you do on a daily basis can help stop the spread of the virus. So wash your hands, don't touch your face, reduce the number of people that you come in contact with, going out only for essential items, food, maintain safe social distance, and above all, continue to wear your mask. It helps, and it is mandatory. I still see a few people every now and then at the store not wearing their mask, and it's difficult for businesses to try to monitor that, and if people take them off, it's difficult. I've had and as I've said before, if you need a mask, if you need a face covering, please contact me. It is critical that everyone have them, and hopefully you have a reusable mask as opposed to a disposable mask. The amount of gloves and masks that I see on my morning runs is a little surprising at times, but with everybody using them and conceivably throwing them away and the wind blowing them away, it is possible that they'll be out there. But a reusable mask is just as good. Get into the habit of coming home, washing your hands, washing your face mask. It does help save lives. You could be a carrier of the virus and not show symptoms, or somebody you meet could be a carrier and be asymptomatic also. So please be careful when you're visiting with anyone. So anyway, let's go ahead. We're now 136 days after the March 16th health order of sheltering in place. And, it's since that declaration, a lot's happened. More happens every day. I have conference calls, I have press conferences to watch. I confer and then advocate on your behalf as much as possible. But we're doing, we're getting through this, and I hope everyone, if you have issues, definitely feel free to reach out. this is one of my jobs as mayor, as counselor in chief, and I hope that I'm able to provide some words of encouragement and help people through all this. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about what's happened at a federal, state, county level, and of course a city level over the last week. So last week, the Governor Newsom announced that certain service, basically licensing from a statewide licensing standpoint, certain services would be allowed as long as they're happening in open air, so al fresco. So barbershops, nail salons, massage parlors, they've now been allowed to start, and so they're working through from a county level, from a city level. We're still working through some of the logistics. Definitely, in talking to some of the barbers and hairdressers, it was difficult enough to try to set up for indoor operation, and now they're working on what makes sense from an outdoor standpoint. A tent, having a tent, a canopy, some sort of sun shelter, um, but enough outdoor air movement to make it safe. And of course, still everyone still needs to wear masks and gloves, and sanitizing all the equipment. All that's in the state order. So it's definitely uh, good that some of them can reopen, but I hear it's very reduced and very difficult as far as some things can't be moved outdoors. So we'll see how that goes. From a number standpoint, it doesn't look like we're going to be dropping off the state watch list anytime soon, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But from that standpoint, the outdoor operations of all these industries are the main focus. Last Friday, I ended this. We moved the weekly office hours from 9 to 10 to 8:30 to 9:30, mainly because of a fire graduation. So we had in the middle of COVID-19, and this started in February. Uh, the we have a fire academy that we put on, and sometimes it's a co-academy with other jurisdictions. This time it was only Sunnyvale recruits that were going through the academy, and so we graduated 8 recruits last week. And Sunnyvale has a very unique public safety model, as we've talked about before. And I put that out there. A video that I had with a council member in Palo Alto to talk about our model. All of our sworn public safety officers are trained in police, in fire, and EMT. And so for the graduates from last week, there was a mixture of people that some of them were doing the last step as far as that's concerned of their training. So some of them were finally going to be sworn in after they went through all 3 of their stages and all the supplemental training that they need. Some of them, this was their first set of training, and they were going on to the police academy in the fall. So it's because there's so much training before an officer is fully sworn in. It makes it difficult from some degrees because we can't immediately hire a new officer and have them come on board. That being said, it makes for a much well-rounded officer when they're dealing with their operations in either police work or fire work, and that to me is, I think, one of the strengths of our department. So from that standpoint, I was happy to see, it was all safe, socially distanced. It was difficult from one standpoint because the families weren't there. It's usually a great celebration. It was just the officers, a few of the command staff, the city manager, myself, and the police and the chief, DPS chief there. So it was a little more somber, but it was at least streamed so that all the families at home could see their loved ones graduating. So that was positive. It was just a little bit not as festive as an event as it normally is. And then on Monday, Sunnyvale Community Services had their yearly Backpack to School program. And so we've talked about this before. I was happy to donate myself, as well as reach out to multiple organizations to help them donate. And so what this was is all the public safety, so all the needy families, all the students. And I know that there's going to be a lot of distance learning that's going to be happening in the coming year, but it's important that all the students are well prepared. So it's a backpack filled with school supplies so that they can actually be active students. And then the other half of that is from a giving them a gift certificate for shoes. And it's doing whatever we can. And about 2,000 students are part of that program. And so I was very happy that it was all a car parade of appointments, so that students and families could come there and pick up their backpacks. And they didn't get as much choice. Normally it's go through Sunnyvale Community Services and being able to pick out a specific backpack and color. It wasn't as easy as it's been in past years, and not as great experience. That being said, I was happy that everything was safe, socially distanced. Under COVID-19, we were still able to provide those resources to those kids going back to school in the fall. So it was actually very positive from that standpoint. On Monday, so at a federal level, and we don't talk too much about federal level here, but the Senate Republicans unveiled their version of the HEROES Act, which was the HEALS Act. So as opposed to the HEROES Act, which had about $3 trillion, the previous Congress had put forth the Congress had put forth a $3 trillion HEROES Act. The Senate Republicans put forth a $1 trillion HEALS Act. Now they need to start working on figuring out, strike a balance between the two bills. The big thing that bothered me about, of course, the Senate bill was we didn't, ultimately, we didn't see any funding from the first CARES Act. So only cities above 250,000 ended up getting any funding. And so we were hoping that with the HEROES Act, and that was part of it, that we would actually be able to get some federal funding for all the money that we spent during COVID. The new Senate bill doesn't provide that, so it's like whatever you can do. And I know our state senators are already on board, but hopefully it does help to call them and say that you're behind it. But it is difficult right now that as far as this next stimulus package, conceivably our city and small cities don't get any of that funding. So it is important that it also it does do hazard pay for essential workers. It does do housing relief, other measures that are part of the HEROES Act. It was also there. The HEALS Act did cover a certain amount of small business and liability protection. It did do some extension of benefits. So it has to, ultimately it's working out the differences between those two bills and what can be done. So we'll see how that goes forward. I'm not looking at those resolutions to be worked out quickly, but we can only hope. And on Tuesday, the Caltrain funding battle continued. So, and we've talked about this over the last few weeks. There was a state bill that allowed all three counties. So Caltrain goes through San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara County. And there was a state bill that allowed us to put on the state measure, put a ballot measure on the November election, that we would look at long-term funding, and the proposed was a 1/8 cent sales tax measure for all three counties to do long-term funding for Caltrain. And so there's been an ongoing battle. The San Mateo County approved this about 2 weeks ago. The San Francisco Board of Supervisors and Santa Clara have some issues with governance, and that's been going on for some time. So the San Francisco Board of Supervisors first voted a week ago to basically deny the bill, but they finally passed a measure this week that put a 1/8 cent sales tax on the ballot with conditions. And so the biggest thing is, you know, that sales tax would bring in about $108 million annually for Caltrain. And Caltrain is one of the best transportation systems in the nation as far as fare box returns. So about 70% of the operational cost of Caltrain is covered by the fares that are charged to those riders. So as opposed to like VTA, which is around 12%, it actually was doing very well. But that being said, with the COVID downturn, there were lots of shortfalls and the question of long-term operation of the system. So the 1/8 cent sales tax, which had been kicked around, only becomes more important with what's happening with Caltrain and what's happening with COVID. So getting that long-term funding, like BART has, like VTA has, from a sales tax dollar, for every dollar of sales in Sunnyvale, 1 cent goes to the city, and 1 cent also goes to VTA. So having a similar sort of funding that would go towards Caltrain, 1/8 cent, would actually make sure that that's fiscally funded for 20 years or more. And so the new proposal that the San Francisco Board of Supervisors did was direct the proceeds from the November sales tax into an escrow account controlled by all three counties from a joint powers board. And so this didn't allow so it put more restrictions from those tax proceeds, so that releasing the money would require 2/3 supermajority of the Caltrain board, which has representatives from San Francisco, from San Mateo, and Santa Clara County. Right now, the operation is run by Samtrans, and so it's seen as easier, but there's been let's say dissension in the past, and San Francisco and Santa Clara counties haven't had as much say as they would like. So this is trying to control the purse strings a little bit more. San Mateo County has said that this would cause a lot of confusion when it goes to the voters, and conceivably, even though it polled initially, the 1/8 cent sales tax polled well and reached around the 2/3 vote. This would, because of the confusion, this would have people basically decide not to vote for it. So we'll see where this goes. It goes to the Santa Clara Board of Supervisors on August 11th. So it still has a ways to go as far as that's concerned. But we'll see, where funding for Caltrain is. Electrification continues to go forward. Just this week, Stadler, which is doing the construction for the new electrified Caltrain systems, completed assembly of the first car. And so that's that's at a facility in Salt Lake City. And so that's there's ongoing tests, but ultimately our first car was completed. So electrification is coming. I'm hoping that the funding is there to make sure that Caltrain is still viable when that actually happens. And then on Tuesday, Sunnyvale City Council members met, and it was all remote meeting, as everything seems to be nowadays. And we did several things. First, we did something we do on a yearly basis. We approved funding for the community event and neighborhood grant program. And so this is a program that we've had for years. It basically sets aside a certain amount of money for neighborhoods to do events, and these events are block parties, are national night out, are some kind of get-togethers to kind of build your community. So those are the neighborhood grants. And then from a community event standpoint, and this is targeted for events for more than 500 people, but with COVID, we'll see where these go. We had a good number of people apply, and so from the things that were approved, it was Bike to Work Day. It was the holiday tree lighting. It was the pet parade, which we had for the first time in years last year. And then from a downtown association, it was also to do a movie night, movie nights in September, and a Murphy Street music. So that started 2 weeks ago, or actually just started last week. So Wednesday and Thursday night, there's a DJ playing kind of music to do ambiance from that standpoint downtown. And that I've gotten a lot of good feedback that people really seem to appreciate that. And so, from that standpoint, that's the community events that we normally fund. And then there's neighborhood grants, and that has a mixture of different neighborhood associations putting in for grants for ice cream socials and National Night Out, block parties, all that. And so we approved the funding for those on Tuesday. Uh, Definitely, there's questions about whether or not all these events will happen. National Night Out was supposed to happen next Tuesday. It's always the first Tuesday in August. It's now been moved to October, and we'll see where we are in October and whether or not those events will actually be able to happen. And then another thing that we did was we considered funding recommendations for the Sunnyvale Cares nonprofit grant program. And so we've talked about SB Cares before, and SB Cares initially was small business grants for small businesses here in Sunnyvale, and this was allotted. This allotted $600,000 towards that program, and then a lot of the larger companies and developers within the city ended up more than matching that 600,000. So we ended up having over $1.3 million to basically give as $5, $10, or $15,000 grants to small businesses. So there was a window that they applied, and then the Enterprise Foundation, which is a nonprofit here in the South Bay, ended up randomly going through those applicants because we knew that we'd run out of money. It's like as we've seen in other programs, especially in San Jose, most of these programs are oversubscribed, and from that standpoint, it's not who gets in first. We thought it was more important to make it a window and then randomize it. And so those monies have been given out. But what council also did when it was setting aside $600,000 for small business, they also did $150,000 to nonprofits. So it was for those nonprofits that have continued to do services during COVID-19, and some of those services, providing services to our residents has been critical. And then a lot of nonprofits that are still either operating or trying to operate and maintaining their buildings when things are closed. They haven't been able to have fundraisers, or from that standpoint, it was making sure that they're also helped. So there's a long list of service organizations and other nonprofits that have been helping our community that we help fund. And so that was one of the other things that we approved. And so a list of those include, of course, Our Daily Bread, the Self-Help for the Elderly, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, and then let's see, Sunnyvale Education Foundation. All of these are providing services, providing food. Bay Area Furniture Bank providing furniture to people in homes. And from that standpoint, the Fremont High School Foundation, providing assistance to families in need. So there's been a lot. Downtown Streets team, which is actually, been basically, it helps homeless and people in transition find jobs, have a regular schedule, and gives them an actual job. And so that's one of the things. Of course, there are also certain nonprofits like Maker Nexus that's been providing face shields to healthcare workers, frontline workers. The Historical Society, the Lace Museum, other Sunnyvale community players that have tried to continue operations during, during shelter in place. And so from that standpoint, it's not easy, but it's making sure that, the community gardens, making sure that they have, some operational funding, because it's these nonprofits either providing services or trying to stay alive. It's trying to stay operational during shelter in place, which is critical. So that's one of the things that we did, from giving those recommendations and allotting that money on Tuesday night. And third, we also adopted a HUD consolidated plan and an action plan. It's basically for home investment partnership, home funds, and community development block grants. So you might have heard of CDBG money from a federal level. And so we put forward our basically housing and human development plan for the next 5 years. But most importantly, we did an action plan for this fiscal year based upon federal funds that we get that are all based upon the number of residents in our city. So if you haven't filled out your census, this is critical. And I was going to bring it up later, but let me bring it up now. If you haven't filled out your census, or know somebody, know a neighbor that hasn't, please remind them. Please encourage them to fill out their census, because this federal funding is all based upon the number of residents that we have in our city. So we had and so from a city standpoint, from an action plan standpoint, we applied another $250,000 of that to COVID-19 rent relief and community support. So that went to Sunnyvale Community Services for that program. And we've given our at the beginning of the shelter in place, that was one of the first things we did, was give $250,000 immediately, and we've done multiple series of funding throughout the shelter in place for Sunnyvale Community Services. There was additional CDBG money that we did, and so it's in there dealing with the front line of people needing food, people needing rent assistance, people needing utility assistance. Another part of Tuesday night is we funded Sunnyvale Community Services Work First program for about $400,000. And the Work First Sunnyvale program has been around for about 6 years now, and it's a partnership between Sunnyvale Community Services and the Downtown Streets team. And so the program provides homeless and at-risk clients with job readiness training, job placement service, career counseling, supportive services, and it's a really great program. It's helped beautify our downtown, and it took a while for the county to say that this was okay, and finally they got their approval. But it's really important to help those in need and get them back into basically a regular job. So that was really important. And then another portion of the action plan was $480,000 to the Block 15 project. And so the Block 15 project is city-owned land that's right at Iowa and Matilda and Charles. So it's the south end of what we'll call the Denny's project. And it's to create a 90-unit affordable housing development on city property. And so, there's affordable housing group that came together to basically build that project. But Block 15 will serve severely low income, low income households, and 25% of those units will also be set aside for households with developmental and intellectual disabilities. So, that's one of the things that we do, that from our housing mitigation funds, and, for all the office space, all the commercial, all the housing that's built, we take a certain amount of housing mitigation funds and then refocus that into affordable housing nonprofits for them to build housing in our city. And it took over the last about a year and a half or so, we finally have gone through that process of approving what that project will look like. And this is making sure that they have appropriate funding to actually do new construction activities. So this is actually kicking off that construction. So hopefully we'll see that being moving forward, and the homes that are there right now will be basically demolished, and they'll start doing underground parking and other operations along that area. So this is part of that funding to make sure that we're making we're doing whatever we can to try to build affordable housing within our city, and provide appropriate services. So that's the main thing that we use these federal funds for. And then on Wednesday, the governor announced, a state record. So as far as the number of deaths that we've had due to the coronavirus, and in a little more than a week, we've hit that all-time high, like 3 days or 3 or 4 days in a row. So on Wednesday, I think it was 193 deaths, and those. This is really kind of is a result of the surge of cases that we started to see over the last month. So especially in Southern California, Central Valley, and this has kind of caused the governor to turn back to that dimming switch as far as what operations could happen around the state. But because of the increase of number of cases, we're finally seeing 2 or 3. We had a surge, really about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and now we're starting to see a similar surge in the number of deaths. So whatever you can do, try to prevent the spread of this disease. We're nearly at 500,000 COVID-19 cases in the state, and we're having about 9,000 new cases about every day. And a lot of those cases are from the Central Valley, are from the Los Angeles County area. And as far as people wanting to open up things, definitely I don't see that happening. There's been more than 50,000 infections, COVID-19 infections in the Bay Area alone, and about 800 deaths. So and those numbers are kind of reflect what's going on at the federal level. The U.S. continues to add about 65,000 new cases a day, and the cumulative cases for the U.S. are now about 4.4 million. So, and the national death toll has passed 150,000. So this pandemic has really affected a lot of people, and there's no end in sight. It's a disaster that we've never seen before. Normally when there's an earthquake, when there's a hurricane, it hits and then it's recovery. Right now, with the surge that we've seen, in the state and around the country, there's no immediate end in sight. And until we have some sort of vaccine, the best thing you can do is prevent that spread as much as you can. So let's actually just go on to the county health board numbers. So new cases did increase over the last week, from a state level and from a county level. We now have for our county 9,731 new cases, or confirmed cases. That's about 1,200 new cases over the last week, which is down a little. So the previous week was 1,400. The week before that it was 1,300. So definitely we're seeing a little downtick in the number of new cases. So that surge has leveled off a little bit. And then as far as deaths, we've had about 100. We've now had 190 deaths in our county. That's 9 new in the last week. So it's been kind of around that number. It was 5 last week and 10 the week before. So it's about that same number as far as the number of deaths, but at least the number of new cases has dropped a bit. And then currently there are 177 hospitalizations compared to 173 last week. So we're staying around those same numbers. At least there hasn't been an uptick. And then as far as by city, we always look at San Jose. San Jose is half of our population in the county. So they now have 6,331 cases. That's up 808 from the previous week, or 808 over the last week, and a week ago it was 925. So they've went down a little bit. So I think we're seeing, at least some sort of a leveling out as far as cases are concerned. Sunnyvale now has had 480 cases. That's 43 up from last week. 43 new cases, which is down from 59 the week before, or 53 the week before that. So we've definitely seen a drop in the number of cases here in our city. So I continue to keep doing advocating for whatever we can. Meeting with the county supervisors, or at least virtually meeting with the county supervisors and calling them. And we had our first pop-up testing almost a month ago. We finally are getting more testing within our city. So at least two days in the upcoming month, and you'll start seeing more publicity about this. The county mobile van will be returning to Murphy Park. This time it won't be drop-in. That was one of the issues that people had of waiting hours in line. This time it's going to be by appointment, so people will basically sign up for appointments, and it'll be the second and fourth Mondays at Murphy Park. So you'll be hearing more information about that coming soon from the county as well as from the city. But it's good to see testing, and conceivably that'll be at least 2 days a month for the upcoming few months. And then El Camino Hospital is also looking at opening up a different program also at Murphy Park other days of the month, but that'll mainly be targeted towards essential service workers. So making sure that city workers, restaurant workers, healthcare workers are all able to get tested is a critical thing. So the county will be doing its pop-ups at least twice a month, and then and if you do need testing, as I've said before, go to sccfreetest.org, and it'll give all the different locations around the county that you can get tested at. I think it's over 50 locations now, not including other hospitals and all that. And El Camino Hospital you can actually make appointments there. They're doing testing in their district. The Planned Parenthood in Mountain View is also available. So we're trying to make sure that we have enough testing, just to make sure that if people are being exposed, they can find out, they can get tested, and then the appropriate tracing can happen afterwards. And making sure that we have those tracing numbers is really important. So let's go ahead and get to get to questions for the week. So Alicia asks, can apartments please get composting services? So composting, so there's two things. Composting services isn't really done at apartment level, and so you can talk to your apartment complex if you want to do composting. That being said, we are working on trying to get food cycle, and that's one of the positive things that we've been doing, getting food cycle active within our community. So as a Sunnyvale resident, there's two things. You have, if you're a single family resident, you have in a single family neighborhood, you have green waste bin for all the yard clippings, and that's being used as compost. So that compost is available at the Smart Station, and you can now pick it up. You have to bring your own shovel and bring your own basically some container, whether or not it's a bucket or whatever, to move that out. And it's only one person per household and all that, but there are restrictions, but it is back open, and all the green waste is converted, all the green garden waste is converted into compost or sold off. One of the big things that we have is our compost is worth a lot more than other cities around us because we don't intermix food. We have our food cycle program, and from a food cycle program, this was put in about 3 years ago, and for single family homes and from a single family neighborhood, we've had a good amount of people take part of that program, and the food that goes in there was initially converted into a very acidic water. It was converted into basically biofuel and a high protein powder that was ultimately going mainly to basically animal feed, so pig feed and all that. That being said, we've actually, because we started that program, a lot of that food wasn't going into the landfill, and so that was a positive thing from our standpoint. And then we also found out that biofuel, that fuel, could be converted into help to run our smart station. So that's one of the things that we pivoted to over the last year. We've got a trial program going at the smart station right now on that. But the other thing is, because that food wasn't going to the landfill, and food is usually very heavy because it has water, the amount of items, the weight of the tonnage going to landfill was a lot lighter. And so ultimately, from our standpoint, it saved the city a lot of money. And last year, we actually reduced the garbage rates because of the food cycle program. Now, right now, that's not available in the apartments. That being said, if you want to be part of the food cycle program and you're in an apartment or a condo complex, you can, collect that food and drop it off at the smart station. There are locations there that collect it and still utilize that. So if you want to be part of that program, you can. Part of our Climate Action Plan 2.0 effort and part of our Climate Action Playbook is to start that same food cycle program at apartments, at multifamily dwellings. And so that is, a critical step in order to keep food waste, from going into landfill. And I applaud you, Alicia, and your family for wanting to be part of that. For now, hopefully you can go to the smart station and drop that off. That being said, working with the current waste management and our environmental services team, they're currently working on a program to try to do that so that all the locations, all the multifamily within our city has that available. That's part of our new franchise program, a franchise agreement, that making sure that that's there, and it's part of our Climate Action Playbook. So definitely, I applaud you for wanting to be part of that program, and it's really good that it's by state law we have certain requirements that we need to meet, and this is important that Sunnyvale's leading the way here in the South Bay to make sure that we're keeping food out of that. So thanks for that. I got this question: what's happening with downtown? So several things, and this is been an ongoing comment and question for the last few weeks. The August 11th council meeting will be very important from a downtown standpoint. And so there'll be 5 different items related to downtown that'll be there. First is Plaza del Sol Phase 2. So the plaza across from the Caltrain station, which was put in about 2006, 2007. It was kind of that Phase 1 version, and there's been community outreach last in the fall, and from that standpoint, all that community outreach has come up with a preliminary plan, and once that's available, I'll be publicizing that so that people can give comment either through email, through phone calls to council, or join the meeting. So that's the first item that'll be there, and then several downtown specific plan updates will be there. So there's a parking update, so downtown parking policies, and that was a study issue. An update to the downtown specific plan, zoning, and EIR, because of kind of a changing number of housing, office space, and retail. There's a downtown agreement with STC Ventures, so with City Line for that project. There's also an agreement with the developer for the old post office site. So there are 5 different items that are coming to council during that meeting, and so we'll see how long it is. But if you have comments, once all that information and the reports are online, as far as the the parking, the EIR, the downtown specific plan, those are available now, and they've gone through a series of boards and commissions. Just Monday night was the planning commission. So the final step is when it goes to council on Tuesday, August 11th. So hopefully you can join that meeting. And let's see, and then, and other things happening downtown. A few weeks ago we talked about a new restaurant opening, Sweet Sicily. And so in the location of the Il Postale location on Murphy Avenue, they finally finished all their paperwork, and actually they have their grand opening tonight. So the ribbon cutting is tonight at 4 p.m. So definitely, if you get a chance to give them a try. It's not just Italian food, as old Il Postale was. It's also baked goods. So it's actually a Sicilian family that came to the U.S. about 5 years ago, and they had their first location in Gilroy, and now they're opening their second location right here in Sunnyvale. So, if you get a chance, give them a try, visit them this weekend. I'm looking forward to having, a new restaurant, and we've had several new restaurants that have been opening in Sunnyvale over the last few months, and it's not a difficult time for restaurants in general, with only takeout service or al fresco seating. But I'm happy to see that they've actually done a lot, and did some interior work, put up their signage, and having a bakery within our city or in the downtown. And there's several different bakeries here, but it's actually positive, and I think it'll add to the experience of Murphy Avenue. Oh, what is the Asian gypsy moth? So, so the county detected the Asian gypsy moth in Sunnyvale earlier this month, and the gypsy moth caterpillars are it's an invasive species, and it really threatens native oaks, fruit trees. Caterpillars actually eat a large amount of leaves and shrubs. And so you'll start seeing green traps around the city. And it's not just Sunnyvale, our 23 square miles or so. It's 81 square miles of the county where these traps have gone up. So, it's an invasive species. If you see one on the tree, on a light pole, that's what they're there for. We're trying to capture them. We're trying to prevent the spread as much as possible. So hopefully that's a good thing for the city, and from a county standpoint, with all the agricultural, with all the trees and all that, having those invasive species can be very scary. What's happening with the pool, and will they be providing swim lessons? So we've talked about the pool. The pool opened up for lap swim about 3 weeks ago, and this is important from a certain standpoint that our old basically the swimming operator decided that they couldn't continue under COVID-19, and so Sunnyvale City staff have been working to make sure that that's operational. Right now they have morning hours and late afternoon hours, early evening hours for lap swim. And I've gotten multiple questions. If you have questions, definitely feel free to reach out to the city. But some of the questions I had are children able to do lap swim? Well, they can't register to actually they can't register for a lane. That being said, a lane can be used by two people from the same household. So conceivably, a parent could sign up for their child, is from what I hear. So there's a registration process. Only adults can register. We want to make sure that everyone is following the rules of the pool. And another question, of course, is swim lessons. We will hopefully be starting swim lessons in September. And we're also working with several, conceivably master swim or youth swim organizations that are thinking about, utilizing the pool. So we're trying to get, more people access to the pool. Right now, a lot of our recreational staff are doing summer camp. So we've had summer camp, and that's a yearly thing. it's been a little bit difficult during COVID and making sure that you're keeping the children in small groups, and so it's taken a lot more, I'll say, supervision. Once the summer camps finish, sometime in August, then conceivably we refocus those staff on the pool. So hopefully the pool still has a lot of good operation, and it's trying to make sure that we provide all those services that the city, that the residents want. Not as easy during COVID, but trying to do what we can. Let's see. Question: I submitted a service request regarding uh, the lake of water along my curb and possibility of could it be made to the coming work as far as next door marked fixes. I only got a response. The request has been closed. Is there an inquiry about disposition? So yeah, you should. So you should be able. They should be able to give you an access number from a public works standpoint. There's a public works number, and I'll post that for you. Definitely, a lot of the work. So the work that you might see happening on sidewalks right now and curbs was actually approved last fiscal year. So it usually takes. They mainly focus on that work during the summer. So the work that's happening right now was approved for the 2018-2019 fiscal year. And so, we basically went out for RFP, and the companies are going out and doing final, and you'll see it around the city right now. They mainly focus on summer months to replace sidewalks, to replace curbs. If you had a new curb issue or new sidewalk issue, they'll come out and patch the sidewalk. And so that's still important. If you see an issue, go to Access Sunnyvale and definitely open up a ticket so that our city staff can come by and inspect, figure out how it can be patched. And one of the things that during the unknown as far as this budget year is concerned, we decided to postpone certain things, and part of that was this year's. Normally we had additional funding going towards sidewalks, additional funding going towards tree trimming around the city, and the city staff are still doing tree trimming. City staff is still doing patching of sidewalks, but we outsource a certain percentage of that. And from a fiscal standpoint, because of the unknowns of our budget, one of the things that we did was postpone new and additional sidewalk repair, curb gutter repair for 2020, 2021. And then as far as trees, basically focusing on city staff doing those as opposed to a wider swath. So you should be able to reach out to the city. They should have given you a more clear response on what the issue are, what the resolution of that was. My guess is they went out, they inspected, and it's been added to the list of future curb cuts or curb replacements, gutter replacements. The problem is all those existing ones, and it might be farther down the street that's being repaired right now, were basically approved over a year ago. So they have their long list, and and we've added additional funds over the last few years to try to catch up. But it doesn't seem to matter as much funds as we put into replacing sidewalks, fixing city streets, tree repair. It remains about constant every year, and so we'll try to get to hopefully in the coming year. But the laundry list of requests is pretty long, and we only have so much resources as far as trying to catch up, which never seems to happen. Obviously, this is a long way off, but my kids are already talking about Halloween. Will the city be issuing guidance closer to that day about what residents could and cannot do to celebrate the event safely with kids? And I'm not sure if trick-or-treating can happen. Actually, yeah, I brought this up with the county earlier, and hopefully, that is being planned as far as what's safe from a trick-or-treating standpoint. I've already, whether or not there'll be safe Halloween locations that from a city staff standpoint, we might end up doing something. And then, I've already started picking out my mask to go with a Halloween costume, because I I think that definitely that's going to be the case, that we will, that there will be issues about that. And that's one of the things that the county does, is set aside those guidelines, and figuring out what's safe. And so that will be happening definitely sometime within the next month or two. When is Whole Foods opening? So I know that they're still doing construction. I haven't talked to the City Line project probably for the last month. So I'll check in with them and hopefully have an answer next week. Last I saw, they're still working on the interior, but they haven't been filling that out yet. It was supposed to happen, September. We'll see if they're still on track for that, but I know that they are still doing interior construction as far as that project is concerned. And let's see, any other questions? I think that's about right. It's almost 10 o'clock, so hopefully we'll get things will be clearer next week on some of these questions. This is the whole thing. I try, if you have questions, always feel free to reach out to me. It is, I get lots of questions, and there's a lot of work as far as being mayor, but I think people really appreciate having that direct contact, either pointing, and I don't answer everything. Sometimes it's go talk to this person, go call this person from city staff, but it's having that, I'll say, constituent services, which I think people really appreciate at the end of the day. And it's actually good for me as far as trying to make sure that people can get their questions answered in the community, can get assistance, or people that are wanting to get more involved. Here's those locations, and it's a lot of effort, but I get a lot of enjoyment out of it. So it's 10 a.m. And so let's go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for joining me again this week. As always, I'm proud of Sunnyvale's response to the pandemic. This has become a whole new normal, and there's still changes every day, figuring out what's happening with distance learning, what's happening with restaurants, what's happening with services like barbershops and nail salons. It's an ever-changing kind of view, but we'll get through this. Help your neighbors, make and share masks, share homemade baked goods and plant seedlings. Share your fruit. Your lemons, your oranges. Continue to build our community. Help others, especially during these difficult times. A little bit of gratitude is really appreciated by people. I'm proud to see residents pulling together to assist their neighbors, delivering groceries, picking up medication, mowing lawns. If you're out on a walk, wave, say hello to people from a safe social distance. People miss that social interaction, and Zoom meetings, conference calls, phone calls are good, but being in the same room with someone, having that conversation is what people really want. And until we get through COVID-19, we're not going to be able to do that. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together. We'll get through this together. Thank you very much for joining me again today. Have a safe week. Take care, and see everyone next week. Bye.